She saved them from cruelty with nothing but a rifle and a heartbeat full of guilt. But one man wasn't who he seemed. Beneath the sack was a secret older than the land, and it would change her life forever. The rope burned her palms, but she didn't let go. Ada Thorne gritted her teeth, heels dug into the dry hillside as she dragged the first man out of the pit. He was barely conscious, his breath ragged beneath the sack tied over his head, arms bound tight behind his back, legs bruised and cut. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if he was even alive 10 minutes ago when she snuck past the blood-splattered corral fence. But she knew what she'd seen, knew the kind of evil that kept men like this caged like livestock. And she knew she couldn't ride past it again. The second body was lighter, younger maybe. She lifted him by the shoulders and hauled him clear just as the torchlight flickered near the ridge above. They were coming back. She only had minutes, maybe less. The third slave didn't move at all when she rolled him over. His fingers were black from frostbite, and the skin around his ankles was raw, but when she pressed her ear to his chest, she heard it. Breath. Shallow, slow, but breath. That was enough. She slashed the last rope with her knife, yanked the sack tighter over his face, and whispered to herself, "Move, Ada. Move now or die with them." The wind howled across the ridge, scattering sand in her eyes as she heaved the last man onto the mule, lashed him to the others, and slapped the reins. The animal bolted, slow from fear but strong, and Ada ran behind it, stumbling, dragging, not stopping until the ridge was behind them and the torches were lost in the dark. By the time they reached the canyon pass, her chest ached and her skirts were torn. The three men slumped like broken dolls across the saddle bags, blood soaking into the leather, the smell of sweat and rot thick in her nose. She didn't stop to look at them. Not yet. Not until she knew they were safe. When the sun rose, pale and merciless, she finally let the mule rest in the shadow of a crumbling mission outpost. It hadn't been used in years. Half the roof was caved in. But the cellar was dry and cool, and no one but ghosts came this way anymore. Ada poured water from her canteen, first into their mouths, then onto cloths to clean their wounds. She removed the sacks gently, bracing for what she might see. The first man was missing an ear. His nose had been broken twice, healed crooked, and his eyes blinked in sluggish confusion when the light touched them. The second boy, no more than 17, winced when she cleaned the gash over his brow. He didn't speak, just stared at her with the hollow gaze of someone who'd forgotten what kindness was. Then came the third. His face was different. Not just from the others, different in a way that made her pause, cloth trembling in her hand. His features were sharp but not Western. His skin had a sun-bleached hue, taut and dry. But what struck her most was his expression, utterly still, like a statue carved by a hand that knew secrets men weren't meant to know. And when his eyes opened, deep-set and dark as obsidian, Ada flinched. He didn't look at her. He looked through her. "You're safe," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "You're free now." "No one is free," he said softly, his voice low and foreign, with an accent she couldn't place. "Not when they remember." She recoiled slightly. The other two hadn't said a word, hadn't moved more than was necessary to survive. But this one. He sat up slowly, gaze scanning the broken rafters, the stone walls, the dry wind curling through the doorway like a ghost with nowhere left to go. "What's your name?" she asked. He turned his head, and for the first time his eyes focused on her, truly focused. His stare was intense, measured, heavy like judgment. "I don't remember," he said, though the way he spoke it told her that was a lie. She didn't sleep that night. Kept her rifle near, eyes on the crack in the cellar door, listening for hoofbeats, for dogs, for anything that might come hunting. She'd seen the brands on their backs, fresh, cruel, deliberate. This wasn't just slavery. This was ritual. The boy whimpered in his sleep. The oldest man muttered prayers in a language she couldn't name. But the third man, he watched the ceiling like it held answers, never closing his eyes, never shifting. By dawn, he'd already risen. "You're not like the others," Ada said, handing him a strip of jerky. He didn't take it. I was buried for 3 days, he replied instead, staring toward the east where the sun spilled over the hills in gold streaks. Not in the ground, in stone. They pulled me out to ask questions. They didn't like the answers. What were the questions? What gods still bleed? She stared at him. What? He turned. You shouldn't have opened the pit. Before she could ask more, the youngest boy screamed. He woke thrashing, kicking over the water tin, scrambling toward the corner like a cornered animal. The older man tried to calm him, but the boy wouldn't stop, his hands clawing at his throat, his lips mouthing something over and over. Make it stop, the third man said quietly. Ada rushed over, kneeling beside the boy. SHH, SHH, you're safe. No, the boy gasped, eyes wild. The red sun, the mouth, he said we'd see it. What mouth? She asked, but he only sobbed, curling against her. The third man stood behind them, silent. Why do they keep you alive? She asked him later, when the boy had calmed and the others had fallen into uneasy sleep. Why not kill you like the rest? They needed what I remembered, he said simply. And what's that? He looked at her again with those bottomless eyes. How to open the door. By the third day, Ada began to regret what she'd done. Not because they were dangerous, not because she feared them, but because she realized now someone was coming, not bounty hunters, not marshals. Worse. At dusk a rider came, alone, dressed in robes, face wrapped in cloth, horse jet black with eyes too still, too knowing. He didn't approach the mission, just waited on the ridge, watching. The third man stood beside her in the broken chapel, arms crossed, unmoving. He won't come down, he said flatly. He's a marker, a warning. Ada shivered. From who? They were priests once, before the empires fell. Now they're just mouths, mouths that speak what no man should hear. You're not making sense. I will, he said, when you ask the right question. And what question is that? He turned toward her fully. Why you Ada Thorne? She went still. How do you know my name? But he didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the broken altar, ran his hand across its crumbling edge, and whispered something in a tongue that tasted like ash in her mouth. The altar split down the center. Stone cracked, dust bled from the seams. And beneath it stairs, carved in perfect symmetry, leading down into cold, impossible dark. Ada stared at the opening like it had teeth. The air that rose from beneath the broken altar was wrong, dry and old, but not in any natural way. It didn't smell of earth or stone or time. It smelled of stillness. The kind that pressed against your ribs and made your chest forget how to rise. The third man said nothing more. He simply turned and descended into the dark, each step echoing louder than it should have, as if the stairs were remembering something too. Ada didn't move. Not at first. But the boy stirred behind her, letting out a quiet whimper in his sleep, and that sound reminded her why she was here, why she'd pulled them out, why she couldn't just close the altar and pretend none of this had happened. She grabbed her lantern and followed. The stone steps coiled down like a spine. The walls were smooth, too smooth, cut by hands that had tools no one in the territory owned, or remembered. Strange markings lined the passage, shallow grooves and swirling shapes that made Ada's eyes itch if she looked too long. She reached the bottom after what felt like an hour, but the sky above still glowed with evening light. Time didn't flow right down here. The third man stood waiting at the end of a corridor, his hands at his sides, his expression unreadable. Behind him was a door, circular, set into the wall like a wheel. There was no handle, no lock. Just a single indentation in the center, shaped like a palm. This place was buried before your nation had a name, he said, before your God had a book. She didn't answer, didn't know how. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee back up the stairs, to seal this behind her with stone and memory, but her feet stayed still. He stepped forward and raised his hand toward the center of the door. Wait, Ada whispered. But it was too late. The moment his palm touched the stone, the markings on the walls lit faintly, amber veins pulsing outward like blood through capillaries. The door groaned, not like metal or rock. It sounded alive, like bones shifting beneath too much weight. With a hiss, the door slid open. Inside was a chamber, not large, not grand, but still unnatural. Perfect angles, circular floor, a raised stone basin at its center filled with dried red dust, symbols scrawled along its rim. The air inside was cold, not cool, cold like breath in a tomb. "What is this place?" Ada asked, her voice barely audible. He stepped toward the basin, ran a finger through the dust. "It's not a tomb," he said. "It's a memory." "A memory of what?" He looked at her, "Of who we used to be." Back above, the other two were stirring. The boy Eli, as she'd learned his name, was trembling, his fever worsening. The older man, Tomas, knelt by him, trying to keep him calm. Ada returned with blankets and more water, though her hands still trembled from what she'd seen below. She didn't tell them about the door, about the basin, about the man who wasn't really a man. She didn't even know what to call him anymore. He sat alone outside now, staring at the stars like they owed him something. Tomas wouldn't speak to him. Eli refused to look at him. And Ada tried to forget the moment his eyes had gone all black, just for a flicker, when the stone opened like it remembered him. That night she dreamed of sand, of cities carved into cliffs, of suns that never set and blood that never dried. She woke with sweat in her collar and the sound of drums echoing in her ears. The rider was gone from the ridge come morning, but a circle of black stones marked where he'd stood. Ada approached them cautiously, bent down, touched one. It crumbled to dust. They moved camp 2 days later, not because of the rider, not because of the fear, but because Eli's fever was climbing and the food was gone. Ada knew a trader 2 valleys over, old man named Vern, who owed her favors. She left before dawn, rifle over her back, riding hard through the shale and brush, thoughts scattered. When she returned, saddle bags full of salt pork, herbs, and a little quinine, the mission was silent. Too silent. She dismounted, heart in her throat, and stepped inside. Tomas was gone. Eli was curled in the corner, eyes wide, whispering, "He's not gone. He's just below, he's with it." "What do you mean?" Ada asked, kneeling. But Eli only pressed his hand to his lips and pointed toward the cellar. When Ada descended, the door in the floor was open again. This time, the third man wasn't alone. Tomas stood beside him, eyes glazed, hand trembling as he traced one of the wall symbols with his fingertip. "He remembers now," the third man said. "He was a priest once, before the collar, before they burned it out of him." "What are you doing to him?" Ada demanded. "Giving him back what was taken. I didn't rescue you so you could possess people." He turned, and for the first time his expression shifted. Sadness, maybe, or regret. "I didn't ask to be rescued," he said. "You pulled up more than men that night, Ada Thorne. You pulled up memory, and memory has a price." Ada's grip tightened on her rifle. Tomas blinked slowly, then looked at her. "I dreamed of a room made of light," he whispered. "Of a throne buried beneath salt. Of a voice that spoke my name in a tongue I'd never known, but I knew it." "He needs rest," Ada said, stepping forward, reaching for him. Tomas recoiled. "I can't go back up, not yet. I need to remember more." The third man said nothing. Just stepped into the shadows again, merging with them like he belonged there. Ada paced the chapel long after nightfall. Eli slept, but fitfully, still murmuring things in tongues he shouldn't know. Tomas hadn't come back, and she hadn't dared descend again. She wrote a letter to no one, folded it, tucked it into her boot. The next morning, smoke bloomed on the horizon. Not thin smoke, not chimney smoke. Thick, oily black smoke. A signal. Or a warning. By midday, a group appeared on the ridge. Not riders, walkers. Cloaked, hooded. 5 of them, each bearing a mark burned into the cloth across their chests, a symbol Ada recognized from the stone walls below. One raised a hand, not in greeting, in command. "You opened the door," he called. "You broke the pact." Ada raised her rifle. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man didn't smile. "He is not yours to save." Ada stepped forward, heart hammering. "And who is he then?" The man lowered his hood. His face was seamed, ancient, but not aged in any human way. His eyes were too pale, his teeth too perfect. "He was the first mouth," the man said. "He spoke to the pharaohs. He walked in the shadow of their gods, and he carries the truth that will burn your world to ash." Before Ada could fire, he snapped his fingers. And behind her, the mission exploded. Not from powder, from force. The walls cracked outward, the roof collapsed. Dust and stone and screams filled the air as Ada was thrown backward down the slope. Her head struck something. Everything went white. When she came to, the sky was gray. Ash rained softly. And the altar was gone. Ash settled like snow over what remained of the mission. Ada lay half-buried beneath splintered timbers, one arm pinned, her breath shallow, ribs screaming with every inhale. The world swam in and out, pain turning seconds into hours. When she finally managed to push herself upright, blinking through blood and soot, she saw the chapel had been reduced to rubble. The cellar door was gone, swallowed by stone. The ancient basin, the strange staircase, everything had vanished beneath twisted beams and scorched rock. She stumbled through the wreckage, coughing, calling out names. "Tomas," nothing. "Eli," her voice cracked. Only silence answered. Then movement, a soft rustle near the edge of the debris. Ada turned, heart leaping. Eli emerged from the rubble on all fours, face smeared with ash, eyes wide and disoriented but alive. She collapsed beside him, pulling him close, burying her face into his shoulder as tears streaked down her soot-covered cheeks. "You're all right," she whispered. "You're all right." He didn't speak, just held her tight, shaking like a leaf in a storm. But the others were gone. Tomas had disappeared. No blood, no body, no sign of where he'd gone, only a single handprint scorched into one of the remaining stones, a perfect palm, burnt deep into the rock as if fire had remembered him. And the third man vanished like smoke. That night, Ada and Eli made camp beneath the stars with nothing but a blanket and the broken memory of sanctuary. Neither slept. Eli curled beside her, twitching with every breeze. Ada stared at the sky, unable to stop the images burning behind her eyelids, stone opening like a wound, eyes that had lived centuries, words she couldn't understand but felt in her bones. In the distance, wolves howled. They left before dawn. Ada didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay, not after what had happened, not with those cloaked figures searching. She carried Eli in front of her on the mule, riding west toward the high desert where outlaws kept to themselves and nobody asked questions. The land turned dry and cracked. Dust devils rose like spirits across the road. At night, she saw shapes on the ridges, watchers, never close, never gone. They reached a settlement by the 5th day. A collection of lean-tos and canvas tents clustered around a half-dry well. A mining camp, half abandoned. The kind of place where names didn't matter and coin counted more than past sins. A woman named Marla ran a cookfire there. Heavyset, no nonsense. Ada traded her last pistol for food and a cot in an old freight wagon. Eli barely touched his stew, still pale, still too quiet. Marla took Ada aside that night, squinting at the boy. He'd been sick long. Ada hesitated. "Yes, but it's not what you think." Marla snorted. "Girl, I seen a lot of sick in my time. That ain't fever, that's fear. Boy's seen something he shouldn't have. Don't let it eat him." Ada nodded, but she couldn't explain what Eli had seen, what she had seen. How do you tell someone the earth has memory? that you pulled something ancient out of a pit, and now the wind whispered his name. They stayed 2 nights. On the third, Eli vanished. Ada woke to cold blankets and boot prints in the dust. Panic gripped her chest. She tore through the camp, calling his name. Marla joined her, lantern swinging wildly. No one had seen the boy, but the prints led east out into the flats. Ada followed them, mile after mile, until they ended at a stone circle. 7 smooth stones, knee-high, perfectly spaced. And in the center, Eli knelt, eyes wide, mouth moving in silent prayer. She rushed forward. "Eli, what are you doing?" He turned slowly. "He's coming." Ada froze. "Who?" Eli looked at her, not like a child, not anymore. The first mouth. The sand shifted behind her. She spun, rifle raised, but the third man stood still, unarmed, untouched by dust or time. His eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, not with fire but with memory. He looked at Eli, then at Ada. "You left me buried again," he said calmly. "You disappeared," she shot back. "The mission collapsed, you were gone." "No," he said, "it collapsed because I remembered, and they came to stop that." He stepped into the circle. The stones shimmered faintly, just like the symbols beneath the altar. Ada watched, breath caught in her throat as he reached toward Eli, palm open, not to harm, to bless. Eli didn't flinch. "He remembers too," the man said softly. "Not everything, not yet, but enough." "Enough for what?" "For the door." Ada lowered her rifle slightly. "The door's gone, buried." "No," he said, "it moved." He looked east, where the horizon bled pink and gold. The Pharaoh's secret doesn't stay in one place. It shifts, follows memory, and now it waits. "Waits for what?" "For you." Ada shook her head. "No, I'm not part of this. I saved you, that's all." The man smiled faintly. "You pulled us. That matters. You're the link. You were always meant to see." He stepped closer. "You're the one who hears it." "Hears what?" He leaned in, his breath cold against her ear. "The whisper beneath time." Ada staggered back, heart pounding. Eli took her hand, squeezing tight. The third man pointed east. "Come, it's waiting." They traveled across the flats for 4 more days. Nights burned with fevered dreams. The third man never slept. Eli grew stronger, calmer, like a string slowly unwinding. He spoke in dreams now. Words Ada didn't recognize, but the man did. He listened, nodded, corrected. By the 5th day, they reached a canyon Ada had never seen on any map. Narrow, jagged. Bones lined the path, not animal, not all human. At its heart lay a temple. Not crumbling. Not buried. Whole. Pillars stretched toward the sky. Symbols etched in gold leaf shimmered in the sun. It didn't belong in this land, or this time. The man stepped forward, reverent. "This is where it ended," he said, "and where it begins again." Eli looked up at Ada, quiet. "I remember now." Ada hesitated at the entrance. "What's inside?" The man looked at her. "The thing they tried to kill." She raised her rifle. "And why bring it back?" He stepped into the shadows. "Because it never left." It didn't feel like stepping into a ruin. It felt like stepping into a living thing. The moment Ada crossed the threshold of the canyon temple, the air shifted, cooler, heavier, touched by something not quite scent, not quite memory, but close to both. The floor wasn't dust, wasn't sand. It was stone, yes, but worn smooth as if thousands of bare feet had passed over it long before her time, maybe before anyone's time. And the walls pulsed faintly, not with light, but with intention. Every surface held markings, strange pictographs, old but sharp, as if they'd never weathered a single wind. The whole place felt awake. Eli walked ahead of her now, completely calm. He didn't flinch at the sound of their footsteps echoing endlessly. didn't recoil at the way the shadows didn't behave as they should, stretching in directions they shouldn't, sometimes doubling back toward them. He held his hand out like he was greeting someone, touching symbols along the walls like he'd traced them 1,000 times in another life. The third man, the one she'd once known as just another slave in chains, followed behind without a word, but his eyes never left the walls, and he breathed as if every moment took more and more out of him. "Where are we?" Ada asked at last, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer at first. Only when they reached the first chamber did he speak. Not where, when. She turned sharply. "What does that mean?" He walked into the center of the room toward a shallow bowl of black stone inlaid into the floor. This temple was not built here. It was brought, piece by piece, carried by those who remembered. He placed his palm against the rim of the bowl. When Pharaoh fell, the faithful fled, some into the sands, others across oceans, stars, wherever memory could root. Ada glanced around. "You're saying this came from Egypt?" He shook his head slowly. "Egypt came from this." The bowl lit beneath his touch, dim at first, then brighter, revealing tiny gold fragments suspended in the dark stone like fireflies trapped in ice. Symbols swirled, rearranging. A map formed, though not one she recognized, spirals of rivers, jagged mountains shaped like broken teeth, a sun that hovered above a single eye. Eli stepped forward and placed his hand on the map. It responded. Symbols flared. Wind stirred from nowhere. And in that moment the chamber spoke. Not with voice, not with sound, but with memory. Ada saw it all. She saw him, not the man before her, but the one he had been, robed in obsidian cloth, standing beside a throne made of bones and gold, whispering into the Pharaoh's ear as the Nile ran red. She saw cities carved into canyon walls and men bowed in reverence, offering blood and sand and something deeper, remembrance. She saw a great betrayal, a ceremony interrupted, a blade driven into the mouth of the god-king himself, and a secret hidden beneath the tongue, one not meant for human minds. The memory snapped back like a rope. Ada stumbled away from the bowl, gasping. The third man caught her arm. "Now you see." She stared at him, trembling. "You served him." "I bound him." "But you failed." His silence was the answer. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" "Because he stirs again, even in pieces. And if he wakes without us, without the ones who remember, he will not be a king. He will be a storm." They descended deeper into the temple. Every level older than the last. The stone darkened. The markings grew more frantic, jagged, almost desperate. The deeper they went, the less it felt like a temple and more like a prison, a place built not to worship but to contain. Eli slowed his steps now, hesitation creeping back into his spine. The boy's lips moved constantly, whispers in a language Ada couldn't understand, but the third man could. He responded occasionally, always short, always soft. At the final level, they found a door sealed in pitch. No handles, no hinges, just black glass with a single carving, an open mouth with eyes above and below, weeping stars. Eli reached for it. The third man held him back. "Not yet." He looked at Ada. "There's a reason you pulled us out, a reason you felt the cry. You weren't just near, you were chosen." She laughed bitterly. "I was trying to bury my grief." "That is the key." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to place her hand on the door. Ada stared. "I don't want to know what's behind this." "You already do," he said gently. "You've carried it your whole life." Her hand trembled as she raised it. And when her palm touched the glass, everything changed. She wasn't in the temple anymore. She stood in a sunlit field, a child in her arms, a man beside her, John, her husband, alive again, laughing, whole, the sun warm, the wheat gold, everything peaceful, perfect. "Come back to bed," he said, smiling. Ada wept. She walked forward. But as she passed through the tall grass, her feet sank deeper, the sun dimmed, the wheat withered, and John's smile began to bleed at the edges. His voice changed. "Come back," he said again, but now it echoed too deep, too many voices. His skin cracked, his eyes melted to black. The baby in her arms was gone. She held Ash. The field burned. And then darkness. Cold, suffocating, something breathing behind her. "You left the door open," it whispered. Ada came to gasping on her knees in the stone corridor. The door had changed. It now bore a crack down the center. Eli knelt too, pale, gripping his chest. The third man stood frozen, eyes wide. "You heard it," he said. "You remembered." Ada rose slowly. What was that? The gate between forgetting and knowing. "It tried to trick me." "It succeeded," he said. "It knows you now, it sees you." The crack in the door widened. Dust blew outward. Something called. Eli turned to Ada. "We can't run anymore." "No," she whispered, "we can't." They made camp just beyond the threshold, in a chamber lit by veins of gold that pulsed faintly beneath the floor. The third man drew symbols in the dust, protection circles, old prayers. He said little, exhaustion wearing down even his strange endurance. Ada sat beside Eli. The boy had stopped whispering now, just sat still, clutching the golden key they'd found in the chapel, no longer warm but no longer cold either, just waiting. "Do you remember everything?" she asked softly. He looked at her. "Enough." "What was the secret?" Eli hesitated. Then quiet. "He wasn't the first." Ada blinked. "What?" "The Pharaoh, the one with the mouth. He wasn't the first god, he was the last. The others were silenced." He turned the key in his hand, studying the sharp edges. They buried them beneath his voice. And suddenly, Ada understood. The secret wasn't the Pharaoh. It was what he was hiding. In the night, something breached the temple. Not cloaked men this time. Worse. A figure made of shifting salt and wind. No face, no limbs, just shape, presence, a hunger. It hovered in the corridor, dissolving the gold as it passed. The third man stood between it and the door. "You're early," he said. "He's not ready." The thing didn't speak, but the shadows twitched. And then it attacked. The creature didn't make a sound, not as it lunged forward, not a scream, not a snarl, just the howling silence of wind rushing through a grave that had never been dug. It slammed into the third man with a force that shattered the ground, throwing up a plume of golden dust that burned when it touched skin. Ada cried out and rushed to Eli, shielding him with her arms as the temple trembled with the impact. Symbols on the walls flashed briefly, then faded, some going dark entirely as if afraid. The third man staggered back, one arm limp at his side, shoulder torn where the creature had touched him. He didn't bleed. Not exactly. What dripped from his wound was black and thick, like oil and memory. He didn't scream. He planted his feet and raised his good hand, drawing symbols in the air that crackled blue and red, colors that didn't belong in nature. The creature shuddered at the sight, stalling for only a second. But in that second, the door behind them split further down the center with a moan of grinding stone. Ada turned, watching the split widen like a wound. "Don't let it open," the third man rasped. "Not yet, he'll wake hungry." "But we can't stop it," Ada shouted over the wind and silence clashing together. "You can, you touch the gate, you carry memory now." She didn't know what that meant. She didn't have time to ask. The creature moved again, slithering like smoke, reforming a jagged arm made of shadow and old light. It swiped through the air and carved a chunk from the ceiling, stone collapsing inches from Eli's head. Ada grabbed the boy and ran, ducking behind a broken altar that had once been the size of a wagon. She pressed his head down. His hands were over his ears, but it wasn't noise he was blocking. It was thought. The third man dropped to one knee. The creature loomed. And Ada remembered. Not in words, in feeling, in flashes. A windless night in a village where no fire would catch flame. A hand in hers, someone whispering, "You are not forgotten." A book of cloth and thread filled with drawings of eyes, lips, and sunless skies. She hadn't understood then, but now here something woke in her. She stood. The creature saw her. Its form bent, twisted, not in attack but in recognition. It reached for her. She spoke, not in English, not in any tongue she'd known before, but in a language that cracked the air, split the silence like a lightning bolt cutting a lake. Asham Kairim Kathal Natu. The creature froze. Eli lifted his head. The third man stared at her in shock, whispering, "You remembered." The creature shrank back, folding inward, its shape unraveling thread by thread like a tapestry consumed by flame. And then it was gone. They didn't speak for a long time. The door was still cracked, still bleeding cold. But the temple was silent again, or quieter. The third man sat against a column, arms still useless. Ada bound it as best she could with cloth from her shawl. He didn't thank her, just nodded, grim. "You spoke the binding tongue," he said. "Where did you hear it?" "I didn't," she replied. "I felt it, it was just there." He exhaled slowly. "Then it's true, you weren't just chosen, you're a thread, one of the last." Eli sat quietly, still gripping the key. Ada turned to the third man. "Tell me everything, now, no more riddles." He looked at the door, then back at her. In the old world before Pharaoh, before kings and gods and temples, there was memory, not just knowledge but something deeper, the memory of what we were meant to be. The first people didn't die when their bodies failed. They lived in memory passed on through speech, symbol, song. But then came the silence, a hunger, something that devoured memory. Ada swallowed, the thing that attacked us. No, that was a servant, a fragment. The true silence sleeps behind that door. He took names, stole stories, ate the histories of whole cities. But he wasn't alone. Others rose to fight him, threads they were called. People bound to memory who could call back what had been lost. And you were one of them. He shook his head. I was his scribe, I wrote what he told me, until I realized he was erasing even the writing. That's when I broke the bond, fled with the last key. Ada sat beside Eli. Why here, why now? Because the memory's returning. People like you are waking. If the silence rises before they remember who they are, he'll eat it all again. She looked at the key in Eli's hand, and him. He's the last of the old blood. Pharaoh's line, but not a king. A mirror. What he sees, the temple sees. What he remembers, it records. Ada's breath caught. And me. You're the needle, you bind the threads. That night Ada dreamed. But it wasn't hers. She saw pyramids not made of stone but light, each one containing not tombs but voices. She walked among them barefoot, and the ground shifted with every step, red to black to gold to something beyond color. She heard a child crying in the distance and followed the sound. It led her to a throne room where time moved in reverse. A boy grew younger. A queen forgot her own name. And in the center, a figure sat with no face, only mouths. It turned toward her and spoke in three voices, her own, Eli's, and a third she didn't know. "Bring me back, and I will make you forget." She woke in a scream. Eli was already up, standing near the door, hand outstretched. The crack in the gate now glowed faintly blue. "It's calling," he whispered. "I can hear everything." Ada ran to him. "Don't touch it." He turned, tears in his eyes. "It's so lonely." The third man limped over. "He's linking too fast." What happens if he links? Either he binds the silence or becomes it. They stood there, watching the crack pulse. Ada grabbed the boy's shoulders. "Eli, stay with me." He blinked. I know my name." "You always did." "No," he looked at the third man. "He called me Ezeru, that was my first name." The scribe bowed his head. Then you truly are Pharaoh's heir. Eli looked at Ada. I don't want to be him, I want to be me. She pulled him close. Then fight, remember who you've been. The door exploded inward. Not with violence, but with release. Light poured out, not bright but heavy, golden and wet. It flowed like honey, slow and suffocating. From it came a sound like 1,000 whispers in 1,000 tongues, all overlapping. And behind it, a figure. Not large, not monstrous. Just a man. Golden skin, empty eyes, a mouth stitched shut with thread made of stars. He stepped forward. The scribe fell to his knees. Pharaoh. The man turned to Ada. He raised a hand. Eli stood between them. I won't forget, the boy said. Not again. The Pharaoh tilted his head. He pointed at the key. Ada stepped forward, shielding Eli. You want this, then earn it. She drew the symbols the scribe had taught her into the air. The Pharaoh paused. Then he smiled. His mouth tore open, not the stitches but beneath the chin, a second mouth, larger, darker. The air turned to ash. The temple groaned. And then, the temple didn't just tremble, it convulsed. Pillars cracked with sounds like bones snapping, and the stone beneath Ada's feet rippled, softening into something less than solid. The very memory of the place seemed to warp, smearing time into a blur. Torches along the wall lit with blue fire, then went dark all at once, casting the temple into a strange, shifting twilight. The Pharaoh had no eyes, yet Ada felt him watching. No mouth, and yet he spoke, not in sound but in thoughts that pried into her like blades under the skin. There was no widow, there was no boy. You are stories, and I have come to unwrite you. Eli stood with the key clenched in his fist, but it was clear he was struggling. His nose bled, a slow drip down to his chin, and the glow around him flickered like a candle about to die. His hands trembled. The Pharaoh stepped forward, graceful, terrible, inevitable, each footfall silent, yet echoing in the soul. The stitched mouth stretched wider until it cracked at the edges, revealing layers beneath like rings of a tree, each one older, darker, memory upon memory devoured. Ada tried to pull Eli back, but the ground warped beneath them, softening into sand. The scribe, still kneeling, began to chant, barely loud enough to hear. Zainathatori, Zurakelmech, Zainathatori. Ada dropped beside him. What is that? Binding, he rasped. But I am not enough. He's free now. It must be you, the needle. I don't know how. You do. You already spoke the tongue once. Let the memory guide you. Ada looked to Eli. His eyes were glowing now, fully, like molten gold. He wasn't crying anymore, he was floating. Just inches off the ground, but it was enough. The key in his hands had changed. It was no longer brass and worn, but glass and starlight, spinning slowly as if drawn to something deeper than gravity. Then the Pharaoh raised his arm. The wind stopped, and a name filled the air. Ada's name. Not as she knew it, but the one she'd forgotten, a name that cut into her like a blade of light. Sano. She collapsed, clutching her head as memories not hers rushed in. A temple of cloth instead of stone. A child buried in sand to protect him from forgetting. A promise made before time broke. If he ever wakes, find me. Stitch the world closed again. She wasn't just a widow. She wasn't even just Ada. She was Sanel, last of the needles, guardian of the thread of kings. And she had failed once already. The Pharaoh stepped forward again, now only feet away. His hand lifted toward Eli, and for the first time the boy screamed, not in fear but in recognition. You were my father, he sobbed, but you let the world burn. The scribe's chant grew louder. Ada stood, weaving her hands in the air like threads, no longer questioning how she knew the motions. Symbols appeared in light, eyes, rivers, braids, stars. She wove them into a shape, a kind of cage, but it wasn't meant to trap, it was meant to bind. The Pharaoh hissed, not a sound, but a rift in thought. Everything around them began to forget. The temple cracked in places that were never built. The symbols on the walls turned to meaningless scratches. Even Ada's name wavered. But then Eli stepped forward and whispered, "No more forgetting." He pressed the key to the Pharaoh's chest. There was no explosion, no blinding light, just a sound breath, deep, ancient breath like the first wind over the first ocean. The Pharaoh looked down, and for the first time he knelt. "Forgive me," he said, not with his mouth but through Eli. Ada reached forward. She touched the Pharaoh's hand and stitched. Not with thread, not with needle, but with memory. She pulled together the broken fragments, the screams, the fire, the erased names, and wove them into something whole, something new. Eli collapsed. The Pharaoh faded, not vanished, not dead, but resting, retreating into the thread, into the cage, into memory. The scribe gasped, his own arms glowing briefly as the sigils he once carved into stone returned to flesh. "It's done," he breathed. "He sleeps again." Ada knelt over Eli. "Is he?" He stirred, eyelids fluttering. I dreamed of feathers." She laughed through her tears. "You're still you." He nodded. "But I remember now. I remember everything." 3 days passed in silence. They camped near the ruins. The temple had closed itself, the door sealed with no visible crack. Sometimes at night it hummed faintly, but nothing stirred inside. The scribe began carving again, this time into wood, not stone. He said he'd start a new record, a true one, one that couldn't be erased. Ada stared at the stars every night, wondering if the things they'd done mattered in the long run. Would the Pharaoh stay asleep? Would someone open the door again, mistaking danger for destiny? On the 4th night, Eli sat beside her, holding the glass key. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Can I stay with you?" She looked at him, this boy who had once been nothing but a burden handed to her by fate, who was now the last memory of a broken line. She wrapped her arm around him. "You already are." But peace, it seemed, wasn't finished testing them. A rider came at dawn, alone, pale horse, no markings. He didn't speak as he approached, just dismounted and handed Ada a scroll, sealed in wax with the mark of a serpent biting its own tail. She opened it. The message was short. "They are gathering. The gate you closed was not the only one. Come north, bring the boy. The threads are waking." Ada's heart twisted. "It's not over." The scribe read it too. "No, but now we're not alone." Eli touched the seal. "What's the serpent mean?" Ada met his gaze. "It means even circles end somewhere." He smiled. "Then let's ride." They didn't speak of the Pharaoh as they rode north. What was there to say? Eli would sometimes drift into silence so deep that Ada feared he'd been swallowed by memory again. But then he'd blink and smile and tell her a story, half remembered, half made up, about a goat that outwitted a mountain lion. He'd laugh, and it was a child's laugh, not a king's. That was enough for her. The message hadn't said where to meet, only north. But the road narrowed to a point where guessing ended. There were no markers, no towns, no shade. Just the horizon pulling them forward like a thread pulled taut. They came upon the others at the edge of the salt flats, 12 riders cloaked and silent, forming a half circle. Each wore different colors, different shapes on their saddles. Some had faces marked by age, others by pain. One, barely more than a girl, had no eyes, but turned toward them the moment they arrived. "Widow," said the woman at the center. She was older than Ada by maybe a decade, but her voice had the firmness of someone who'd seen centuries. "And child of memory, welcome." Ada didn't dismount. "You knew we were coming." "We knew the door would open. We didn't know who would come out. That you did speaks well." "And who are you?" The woman smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We are the last of the threads who still remember we were ever sown." The blind girl stepped forward. "The gates are waking. There were 7. Yours was the first, it will not be the last. Eli whispered, "What's behind them?" The woman glanced toward the salt flats, and the wind rose, kicking up the bone-white dust. Each gate holds something that was never meant to be unmade. Your Pharaoh was memory, another holds silence, another truth, and one, she said softly, holds time itself. Ada exhaled, trying to steady her heart. Why now? The fabric weakens, stories fray, people forget why they were afraid. Eli stepped forward, then we remind them. The woman tilted her head. Would you bind another gate, boy? I would. You nearly came undone stitching the first. I'm not alone anymore. The blind girl turned toward Ada. We are not calling you to war. We're calling you to repair. Not with swords, with thread, with memory, but it will not be gentle. Ada met the child's empty gaze. We understand. The riders made room for them. They set up camp that night without tents, as if refusing to pretend comfort existed in places like this. A fire was lit, not with wood but with etched stones that glowed softly when struck. The riders sat in a wide circle and each took a turn telling a story, not of themselves but of things they'd forgotten. It was a ritual Ada understood, to preserve what little still held. One man spoke of his sister, who once sang to birds, another of a town that only existed when the moon was full. When it was Ada's turn, she spoke of her husband, not as a widow, but as a woman who had loved, who had lost, who had gone on walking. Eli leaned against her side as she spoke. When she finished, the blind girl stood and sang a wordless tune that made every soul present feel stitched back together, if only for a moment. Then dawn came, and with it the real message. It arrived on the wind. A sound deep and buried, rising from the salt beneath them. A scream. Not of pain. Of remembering. The riders stood in unison. The woman who had first spoken raised her hand and pointed to the east. There, she said, the gate of silence breaks. No one questioned it. They rode. The terrain changed. Salt gave way to dry earth and then to shale that broke like teeth under hoof. The air grew thinner. Birds stopped flying. It was as though the world had paused to listen. And then they saw it. A canyon split the land as though someone had taken a blade and carved the world open. At its center was a door, not in the canyon wall but on the floor itself, half submerged in earth. It was black with no edges and pulsed with a slow rhythm. Eli whispered, "It's breathing." They dismounted. The riders formed a circle again. Ada stepped forward. This time there was no scribe to chant, no glyphs on the walls, just memory, hers, Eli's, all of theirs. And from it they would sew a lock. She pulled the needle from her belt. It wasn't metal anymore. It shimmered like water bending light. It pulsed in time with the door. Eli placed a hand on hers. "Let me help." Together they bent. Ada touched the door. Immediately the silence poured out, not absence of sound but devouring. The world stopped existing in its presence. For a heartbeat, Ada forgot what voices were, what color was, what being was. But then Eli sang. It wasn't a melody, it wasn't even a sound. It was a memory. A tiny bird landing on a rooftop, the first cry of a newborn, the sound of dirt falling on a grave. It was life. The silence recoiled. Ada sewed. One stitch, then another. Each one a moment remembered. The first laugh she shared with her husband. The sound of Eli's breath as he slept. The hum of the blind girl's song. She wove them into the door. It resisted. Then it begged. "Please don't forget me." She wept, but her hands didn't stop. The door grew smaller with each pass. The silence hissed. And then, it was gone. Not erased. Bound. The land exhaled. The canyon softened. The riders lowered their heads. It was done. For now, they built a cairn where the door had been. Not to mark the place. To remember it. They placed no name on it. Only a single strand of red thread wrapped around a stone fluttering in the wind. Ada watched the others mount their horses and begin to scatter. The woman approached her one last time. "You are not what we expected, widow." "I never am." "What will you do now?" Ada looked at Eli. He had fallen asleep against her side. She smiled. "I'll follow the threads until they're all stitched shut. And after, maybe then," she said, "I'll remember how to be just me again." The woman offered her hand. Ada shook it. The riders rode. And Ada turned south, boy in arms, the needle warm in her hand, the world waiting, broken in ways only she now understood. Not a widow, not a slave, not a scribe, but a needle. A mender of stories. A keeper of what was almost forgotten. And she walked into the dust.